Good afternoon. Welcome to the Oklahoma City Water Utilities Trust meeting for July the 6th. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the June 15th meeting. Have a motion and a second to approve the minutes from the June 15th meeting. Are there comments, questions, corrections, additions? Hearing none. We have a new voting system today, so you can vote on the machine. Passes. I think Cody's not here. We need to turn him off. There we go. Okay. The next item is the consent docket. Number of items.
I'd move the consent docket subject to mutual consideration.
Second. Motion and a second to approve the consent docket.
Mr. Chairman, I'm so sorry. Item C4 has a Scrivener's error in the title. This is Approve Amendment 1 and Change Order 1, Kraft Reynolds. The description, Kingsgate Drive between Southwest 180th and Southwest 119th is Southwest 108th and 119th.
Okay.
Right.
We need a motion to accept that amendment. That's corrected.
Would we accept item C4 as corrected?
Have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to correct item C4. Voting, please. It's accepted as corrected. Now, are there matters on the consent docket to be discussed individually? If there are none, we'll be voting. Passes unanimously. The next item is item 4. It's the concurrence docket. There are 3 items on the concurrence docket.
I'd move this concurrence docket.
Second.
A motion and a second to approve the concurrence docket. Are there items on the concurrence docket to be considered separately? Hearing none. Voting, please. Passes unanimously. Item 5 is an emergency construction contract resolution.
Move the emergency contract.
A motion and a second to approve item 5. Is there discussion?
Mr. Chairman, background information for your audience. We had a storm in excess of the 500-year flood level in Oklahoma City on June 14th. The Witcher Pump Station was completely flooded, and Urban Contractors was called in by our operating company to help us work on getting the pump station back in operation. The pump station has been returned to operation. It did suffer some damages to controls that are still being worked out, but it is in operation with backup pumps rented and in place to run the pump station at full capacity if necessary.
Marcia, you made a comment that it was a 500-year flood.
Yes.
Is that the official word from the National Weather Service that we experienced a 500-year flood in Oklahoma City that day?
Oh, it's the official word from the Public Works Director. Stormwater engineer is my source of information.
Corps of Engineers? Okay. Thank you.
Once that, I was going to ask the same thing. Once that decision is made that it was a 500-year flood, is that by basin? How is that? How will that be designated? Or is it by rain gauge? I mean, how do you determine?
No, you've got a graph. There's basically a graph out there with your intensities and rainfall per hour that comes down, and you just go out and plot that. And so if it's an inch an hour, it lands somewhere on the scale. But if it's 8 inches an hour or whatever it is, it goes way out beyond the 100-year or two. So it's an existing graph that's out there based upon all the data that's there that gets modified slightly as time goes on, but not much. And so you just take that intensity level and it goes on to the curve.
But is that data accumulated over a wide area to represent not just a single rain gauge or single event? It covers a multiple source of information?
Yes.
Well, on a map, would it be? I guess I'm stupid.
Well, it changes in geographic areas because, for example, if the rainfall in the southeastern part of the state is 32 inches a year, and in western Oklahoma it's 14 inches a year, which I think is probably pretty close to where they're at, then the curve is different in western Oklahoma than it is now in southeastern Oklahoma, because it's based upon regions.
And in our case, we have multiple watersheds in the community. There are different levels of storm in the different watersheds, but what Witcher experienced was that at Witcher, well in excess of the 500-year storm. Here's how we measure it at that facility. The 500-year storm is 18 inches above the floor, and in this case, we were at 49 inches above the floor, actually. So, pretty darn good storm.
Okay. You understand, Pat?
What I was looking for was some comfort when I tell a constituent that his house was damaged by a 500-year flood. I can be reasonably confident that the area that caused the flood was included in that 500-year determination. And that was the point I was trying to
Councilman, we'll get you some local specific information.
Okay. Because we had one creek in northwest Oklahoma City that caused significant damage. I'll try to tell those people it was a 500-year flood, but I'd like to feel confident that it was indeed a 500-year flood in that particular watershed. Thank you.
You have a motion and a second on the emergency construction contract. We're ready to vote. Voting, please. Passes unanimously. The next item is item 6. Items, each one have to be considered separately. First item is to receive the fiscal year budget for the Lake Atoka Association.
Move the item.
Second.
Motion and a second to receive the budget for Lake Atoka Association. Are there comments? Voting. Next item, item 6B, is a fiscal year budget for and pay plan for the McGee Creek Authority.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second for approval. Other comments? Voting. Approved unanimously. Item 6C is recommended the council the adoption of emergency ordinance concerning the definition of water skiing.
Move approval of the ordinance.
Have a motion and a second to approve item 6C. Are there comments?
I can give you a little background on this. This was before the River Trust a few weeks ago. And the issue is that people are now doing new things than they were a number of years ago when the ordinances were written as far as pulling people behind different types of devices. Where it used to be years ago, it was just pretty much skis. Now it's different kinds of boards and kites and tubes and all kinds of other things that are out there. And the police weren't certain they can enforce anything other than skis. And so they did this. And of course, you can, in Draper, you can water ski and use these type of devices. Hefner, which is more of a fishing and sailing lake, who for years have determined that those aren't compatible activities with the sailing and the fishing, so have not allowed those type of propelled recreational activities out at Hefner. So the police weren't sure they could write up some of the folks that were, I think, being very blatant out there in some of their operations, and so this is to address that issue.
We have a motion and a second on item 6C concerning the definition of
One
water
quick question.
Yes.
Will that impact the people who ski with those big kites?
Sailboarding, no, not if you're not, only if you're pulled by boat.
Okay.
But if you're on your own, you're okay. So if you're wind propelled, you're fine. But if you're pulled behind a boat to get your motivation, then you're not.
Behind a sailboat.
Further discussion? Hearing none, voting, please. Passes unanimously. Item 6D is resolution authorizing the sole source purchase of OEM parts and service from.
Move approval. Second.
Have a motion to approve, motion and a second to approve. Are there comments? Voting, please. Approved unanimously. Item 6E, a joint resolution with the city, the Environmental Assistance Trust, and this trust authorizing the open market purchase of fueling equipment, parts, services.
Move approval. Second.
Motion and a second to approve the joint resolution. Is there comments? Are there comments? Hearing none, voting, please. Approved unanimously. Item 6F, adopt a resolution declaring an emergency and ratifying the actions of the general manager to waive competitive bidding in an amount of $700,000 in relation to the recent flooding situation.
Mr. Chairman, it says in the write-up, from applicable insurance policies and/or federal emergency management agency monies. If we don't get those monies, are we still obligated to waive that requirement and assume the whole $700,000 ourselves?
Yes. This action allows staff to pursue, it defines a potential maximum amount, and allows staff to pursue emergency funding that might be available through the federal programs for flooding or tornadoes. We have separate expenses. We do also have insurance. The Witcher Pump Station flooding, for example, is covered by insurance. We're working with our agency to help determine how much might be available through them.
Further comments? We have a motion and a second for approval. Voting, please. Approved unanimously. Item 6G is a resolution acknowledging the notice of extension concerning the letter of credit, or a letter of credit with State
Move
Street
approval.
Global. A motion and a second to approve item 6G. Are there comments? Hearing none, voting, please. Pass unanimously. Last item on the regular part of the agenda is executive session to discuss the Sardis Lake situation.
Second.
Motion and a second. Have to vote individually. You can do it this way? Oh, my goodness. Voting, please. Executive session is approved. We'll go into executive session at the end after the balance of the agenda. Is there new business? Are there comments from trustees, staff, citizens? Hearing none, we'll be in executive session.